first, thank you so much for saying yes, for being so honest. You've been very honest in the questionnaire that I sent you. And wow, it was a hard read. My heart really, really went out to you. And I'm really honored that you wanted to have a chat and be part of this, because I think even if we can help one person, then we're doing what we're meant to be here for.
I agree. And that's why I'm happy to be honest about how hard it is, because I think if people haven't got that and they don't want to talk about it, it makes it harder to go through. So I agree. If I can help one person, brilliant. Maybe it's all worth it.
Beautiful.
Charly McNeilis is what I go by.
Perfect. So you're 41 years old and you had 2 diagnoses. It'd be great for you to explain a little bit first of the diagnosis that you had.
Normally my response is, which diagnosis? Because I have the joy of experiencing 2. So my first diagnosis was in early Feb 2020, which was right at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think I was around 36. And my second diagnosis was just in February this year, February 2024. Second diagnosis was the age of 40. The first one was triple negative breast cancer, and the second one was long COVID.
Okay, so when we're talking about triple negative breast cancer, can you explain to the listeners and the viewers, what does that mean? Because there's different stages. So what does that mean in the world of breast cancer?
So in the world of breast cancer, it's well known that they can be hormonal. Breast cancer can be hormonal, and they do a number of tests to see, quite literally, are you negative or positive for these hormones? And all of mine came back as negative. So it's called triple negative because it's not actually generated or impacted by the hormones. It's a different form of breast cancer. It's one of the types of breast cancer. And knowing which one it is and if hormones react or not will then, dictate which treatment path you then go down. And yeah, I didn't really know what that meant when I was first told. And obviously it's just one of those things that as you're going through it, you then learn it's just a form of breast cancer.
Okay. And so you were diagnosed at the beginning of the pandemic, which must have been incredibly frightening because we were all dealing with the pandemic at the time. And there was a lot of fear in other areas and in the hospital and things like that. So how was your diagnosis dealt with, and what were your symptoms, and how did it all come about?
For my cancer diagnosis, the symptom that actually led me to the GP was I developed a lump in my breast. So found a lump in my breast, went to see the doctor. That's what actually got me going on to the pathway. I would say that actually once I got to the doctors and she said, oh, yes, you've got a symptom of potentially of breast cancer, we're going to refer you. At that point, I was still kind of, oh, it could be, it couldn't be. But when she did the examination, she noticed that I also had an inverted nipple. And looking at that and then discussing it, she said, actually, you've got potentially 2 symptoms, which didn't really set alarm bells, just I think made it more definitive in my mind that it could be quite serious. Yes, the pandemic was being talked about, but it wasn't. It was this was the middle of February, so it was inkling in the background. So the process was still go to the GP and then urgently refer to the breast unit from there. It wasn't until really, I think, I got to the breast unit that the reality of potential impact of COVID started to hit. I went to the breast unit. It was, go through the screening and the options to see if the lump and the potential inverted nipple, are they cancerous or is it something else entirely? And that involved a mammogram initially, which it's bizarre what you remember, but I remember the individual doing the mammogram saying that I had really good pec muscles, and that made me feel really good in what could be a really, really tricky situation. And it's funny, what kind of sticks in your brain. And I'll never forget that lady and for what she said to put me at ease in that moment, which was really nice. So I had the mammogram, had the check with the breast team, the breast doctor, the breast surgeon, and then they decided I needed a number of biopsies. And I think by that point, I think I was already in an acceptance of what I was dealing with, because I could see a change in the movement and the language and the interaction between the staff, even though I know they're trying very hard to kind of not hide it, but to process it. And also the fact that I had 2 symptoms just made me think, yes, this is something quite serious. At that point, it took a little while to kind of go through then at what point it gets a bit blurry trying to remember at what point I then kind of got the results, what happened next. But then that was when COVID-19 was also starting to ramp up. The thing I vividly remember from that time was more, is chemotherapy safe? Is it going to be surgery? How do we treat this individual? Because by this point, when it was starting to be looked at and COVID was increasing, I developed a lump under my arm. Suddenly I had 3 things and they were like, okay, this is spreading pretty fast. So COVID came into play at that point because it impacted my treatment pathway, but it didn't stop it. And I think that's where I'm very grateful, because it didn't stop it. It just altered the sequence of events, if that makes sense.
What were those sequence of events? What did they suggest? Because obviously, depending on the cancer, depending on how far along it is, they give you different options. What were your options, and how did you proceed? Because a lot of people, I spoke to somebody recently, I interviewed somebody with prostate cancer, and he had chosen not to have chemo or anything like that. So I think it's very personal how you proceed as well.
Absolutely. And I think because you feel a little bit very much in the hands of the gods, i.e. the doctors at that point, to kind of understand and give you all of the options. And they very much looked at it from my point of view as it's, it is cancer. Yes, it is fast spreading. Yes, it is triple negative. So these are all, aspects we are trying to deal with. However, it's curable, it's treatable. You're young and healthy and fit, and therefore more likely to recover and be in a survivable position. From my point of view, when they're kind of giving me options, I didn't really see any reason not to take forward those options, because if it was left to continue spreading as it already had to my lymph nodes or further into my breast, who knows what would have happened. So the, in inverted commas, normal way of then treating what would have been my cancer if COVID wasn't happening would be to have chemotherapy first, look at the size of the lumps, look at how many of my lymph nodes, were affected, see if chemotherapy did its role, i.e., reduced the size of the lumps and took away some of the tumor and the bad cells, to then see if I required surgery further down the line. However, we were in COVID. Is chemotherapy safe in the middle of COVID? The start, basically, we're at the very start now, sort of middle, not quite middle, sort of, 11th, 10th of March sort of date. So we're kind of in early March. There's talk of lockdown, there's talk of things stopping. Is chemotherapy safe with this virus on the loose? They didn't know. So it was looked at, perhaps we need to do surgery first. And it was said, we haven't got time to test everything under your arm. We know your lymph nodes are infected. It could be one of them, it could be all of them. We haven't got time. We've got to take all of the lymph nodes. We've got to somehow take away the tumor within your breast that is causing problems. Let's do surgery. Let's do a lumpectomy. Then we'll think about We'll think about chemotherapy depending on what's going on with COVID, where you are in your recovery. So that was kind of not parked, but like, okay, that's a future option to consider. Expecting everything to go ahead with lumpectomy, came back within kind of a few days of when to have the surgery. And it was like, we actually don't know how long the surgeries, the theatres, how long they're going to be open. We don't know. And sometimes with the lumpectomy, if we don't get it all, we might need to get you back. So we think the best option for you, because it's triple negative, fast spreading, we can't check the margins, can't check chemo, let's just do a mastectomy. Let's take all the lymph nodes, let's take your left breast. And I think some people, when you say it like that, are like, goodness, that must have been really scary. But you know what? In the moment, I was kind of like, right, there's a lot going on that I can't control. There's a lot going on. The COVID, everything, the cancer, this is a lot. The choice I had at this point right now, and my understanding is, you're saying I need to have my left breast taken away and all my lymph nodes removed to give me the best chance at the moment to keep me alive, in effect, because we don't know what's happening with COVID, don't know how fast this is spreading. So for me, it was quite a simple choice. Okay, you take those away, you keep me alive, then we look at the next step. And so that's how, when everyone else, 23rd of March, 2020 sticks in my mind, because that was the first day of the lockdown for the UK, the first national lockdown in 2020. And I'm finding myself wheeled into surgery on my own. My husband just dropped me off at the front of the hospital with the kids in the car, sent me out, and off I went to have surgery. And yeah, you kind of think this could be really scary, this could be really tricky. Okay, this is what I'm facing. They're going to keep me alive. Let's go make it happen. And I think my practical approach kind of kicked in at that point, and I couldn't be overwhelmed because I just had to kind of get on with what was going on in front of me, and that was the surgery no matter what.
It sounds like, obviously we haven't talked about what you've trained as and what you do for a living, but you were in the Army, is that correct?
Yes, so I had done 10 years in the Army, and I deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. So I think there is an element of, me kind of working through those situations with a different approach, a more, practical, methodical, if that's the right word, sort of approach of I need to do X, Y, and Z to make this happen. Yes, it was hard, but it's almost ingrained within me that that's just the steps we had to go through.
Absolutely. And what a fortunate situation to have that mindset that you can sort of compartmentalize and say, right, this is what's happening, this is what we need to do, this is the outcome, that's the positiveness.
Absolutely. And I would say that was the easiest part of the entire process, which is considering that's going into unexpected surgery to save my life in the middle of and the start of lockdown, that's quite a statement. But following a pathway and a process, I can do that. That's fine.
So then after you had surgery, obviously we're contending with dealing with all of the surgery. Did you go straight into the menopause? Because I don't know if a lot of our listeners know this, but a lot of breast cancer patients go straight into the menopause.
I didn't initially with that surgery because it was the removal of my breast and the lymph nodes. So at that point, nothing else had been kind of impacted. What then kind of happened with the recovery from surgery was it was deemed a safe environment. Things had changed that I could then be in a position to have chemotherapy. Once I started going into chemotherapy, then it did seem to be that the chemotherapy impacted different aspects of my body, and it was part of that was some of my functioning within my ovaries weren't working within the same way. I don't think I went into full menopause through the chemotherapy, but it certainly impacted my functioning, and they just said, yeah, that can happen. We'll have to see over time whether it becomes full-blown menopause or whether it's just impacted one ovary. It's one of those things that can be quite hard to monitor, I suppose. Unlike surgery where you can see the size of a tumor, you can check the margins. Has chemotherapy and this toxins impacted that part of my body? It could have. I didn't have a definitive, you're going to have chemotherapy and you're going to be in menopause. It's like, let's just see how it goes. We don't know how your body will react, which is tricky.
But I'm assuming that the medical industry didn't throw you into the menopause on purpose because you were triple negative. Is that correct?
No, that's that. Yeah, I mean, yes, that is correct. So it didn't throw me into that. I did end up going into full-blown unnatural menopause, but it wasn't through that initial process because it was further down the line once I'd had chemotherapy, and I was being monitored and checked to see how my body was, we then got the test results of my genetic testing of the cancerous cells. And it turned out that I was BRCA1, which is my cancer is genetic. It's not funny, but it's just, I think at that point, that was my way of dealing with it. I kind of got to December of 2020 after an incredibly challenging year to be told it's not over yet because your cancer is genetic. And so you're now trying to work through, well, what does that mean? Hang on a minute. I've had surgery. I've had chemotherapy. I've had radiotherapy. Might be in the menopause. We're not really sure, but we're going to work with that. Now there's something else. Now that's something else. If I remember the statistics correctly, which I apologize if they're wrong, but at the time, I remember being told something like an average woman has a 12% chance of getting breast cancer in their life. With this BRCA1 gene, that percentage can increase up to 70 to 80%. It's a significant increase. And that's just not just triple negative, that's hormonal as well. So suddenly I was being told that my other breast, that could be at high risk of further breast cancer, hormonal or otherwise. And this gene also carried a risk of ovarian cancer. I can't remember the statistics for the ovarian cancer. They said, we would recommend the removal of your ovaries and fallopian tubes. So we knew from that process then that my next stage was to have surgery in case of cancer, not because of cancer, because due to it being genetic, that risk was a lot more increased. So I found myself going into February 2021, that really wonderful winter lockdown of 2021 that everyone remembers, and I'm back at the breast unit. I'm having more tests, more biopsies. We needed to check there was no cancer in my right breast, because that basically decides how quickly I'll have the surgery. So we had to have another load of tests, another load of scans, and then to be put onto the waiting list for that next surgery. And that was removal of my right breast, removal of my ovaries and fallopian tubes, and that they said would definitely, there was no two ways about it. It would be a short, sharp, sudden, unnatural, you're in menopause, good luck. It's even more extreme because it's so unnatural and now it's so sudden. And because we didn't really know what was going on from chemotherapy at that point, it almost didn't matter. So I was like, well, at the end of this surgery, we are now dealing with the menopause. That was that next bombshell, do I say? Again, it was hard, but I just think it was just kind of, okay, that's the next pathway. That's the next hospital appointment. That's the next surgery. Do you know what I mean? You're just on this conveyor belt that you think has an end, and then you get a new piece of information. You just keep working it through.
So when you went through chemo and radiotherapy and then you had the operation again, what did you do to manage? How did you find a way not only to compartmentalize, but to support yourself during that specific time, first of all?
I don't know if there was one specific way. I think, again, at the time, the summer of chemotherapy was the summer of lockdown, and my husband was working at home. I had two small children. I had a dog that was under a year old, and I'm going through chemotherapy as well. So it wasn't about putting specific things in place. It was quite literally going, okay, one day at a time. What day?
Survival, it sounds like.
It is. It really was. It was one day at a time, because the children are here. They have different needs. I've still got to find people to walk the dog because I can't go out and Mark's working. It's one day at a time. And I think that mentality just stayed with me even through the next lot of information with the next surgery. I remember trying to do some form of counselling that was offered to me through, through the hospital, but it was too much at home with Zoom. and I had 2 preschool age children, it was almost like I haven't got the capacity to deal with this right now. I know I need to deal with it. Right now, I'm in, like you say, I'm in survival. And I think with the constant process of that, I genuinely think I was still in that survival mode when I was coming into the next lot of surgery, the next lot of information, then on to the menopause. It took me a long time after all of that to actually stop and process. And I think at that point, life just didn't allow me the time. You're in the middle of it. So what was my coping? You're either saying survival or avoidance. It depends how you look at it. I tried to view it as I can only deal with so much at a time. If I start thinking too much about the so what's, the what's if, the way this could go, what this means for my mortality, what this means for everybody else, it was too much. So let's focus on me. What day of the cycle I'm on chemotherapy, how long till the next surgery, what are my children having to eat? You know, that was it. That was my coping.
Wow. Sort of throwing the menopause into the mix on that one is really intense. I mean, I in my own clinic deal with a lot of oncology patients and breast cancer patients, and one of the things that they talk about is that they wish that they would have been explained literally how dramatic being thrown into it so quickly actually is. It's very difficult to understand it verbally because obviously you've not been through it. It's like saying to somebody, explaining to somebody what it is to give birth. It's very difficult to truly understand it until you go through it. However, many of my patients always say that they felt very unprepared for that specific tipping point.
I can understand that. And I would say the comparison with giving birth is kind of exactly the sort of one I would use, because it almost doesn't matter how much that we say, look, it's going to be really hard, it's going to be really dramatic, it's going to be really sudden, you're going to be really confused, you're going to be angry, everything's going to be all over the place. Until you're in it, you don't really get it. And it's not until you're in it that you suddenly go, oh, I see what they meant now. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of, I was told it's going to be sudden, it's going to be tough. And you kind of go, okay, this is going to be tough. Quite literally blew my mind, and I thought I was going crazy. And it was one of the hardest aspects of what I had experienced in the entire 18 months, because there was no clear answer. It was, you could have this symptom, you could have that, it could be something to do with that. It was just so unknown, and it still is, how your body's going to react, how your brain is going to react, and just how hard it is. So felt I was given enough information and told, just don't think, did I not take it on board? You just don't know it till you're in it. That's the reality. Yeah, it's really hard to understand the confusion and the brain fog and I've never had anxiety. I was so overwhelmed. I was so confused. And it's just little things that when you're in that moment, you can't explain. And some examples that I can give, like I remember being out on my bike. I was trying to get back into cycling. And I remember going up to a busy crossroads, and I was coming up a slight incline. So therefore, if you break it down, I've got to stop the bike, focus on the pedals, focus on the gears, look at the traffic, figure out clipping back in, the next thing, and off you go. It's something I have done, I don't know how many times. And I got to those crossroads and there was traffic coming. I'm looking at my bike, and it's like my body and my brain just did their own thing. My heart rate went through the roof. It's like everything went out of my head, and it was just all really noisy and going really crazy. So, do your pedal, do your bike, do this, the traffic's coming, my friend's shouting. It's just like I'm suddenly completely overstimulated and my brain and body goes into shutdown. And I'd never experienced anything like it. And it's not like it builds up, it just suddenly happens. And when that suddenly happens and you feel this complete loss of control, you don't really know why, even though you've been told it's going to be hard and you're in the menopause, that's not coming in at that moment in time. And in that moment in time, and I'm, on the bike, you're just going, you can't speak, you can't explain it. It's really, that was one of the more extreme examples, but it would be little moments like that would just happen constantly that I just wasn't aware of, didn't expect, didn't anticipate. Yeah, really, really tough, challenging time, because there was no pathway. This is your new normal. You need to figure this out. And you're like, okay, I can deal with surgery because you're going to take away my breast and then I've got a recovery time. And at the end of it, it's quite linear. We just go up on a nice recovery. It dips down a little bit because the slightest problem, we go back up. Menopause, well, you're up and down and up and down and up and down, and then you're going backwards. Then you think you got it figured out, and then you're going to go back again, and you're up and down and up and down. And all the medical team are like, yeah, we haven't really got any answers for that because it's hormones.
And there's no solution either, in the sense that you go on HRT, you can't have hormonal replacement therapy.
I made the choice to go on HRT, and it's a very personal choice. A very personal choice. I had a risk either way because of my genetics and because I've got a risk of hormonal breast cancer, and obviously HRT adds hormones to your body. But I felt like my quality of life that I was trying to work through with the menopause, I just couldn't cope with. And it might have been everything that had built up, like I said, as well, with being in survival mode and not processing it, that it kind of, I think I just maybe hit my limit. But when we looked at how much risk there is for me to get breast cancer, once I'd had all of that breast tissue and everything removed, and I'm in a, hopefully safe position, compared to, how do you say it, the risk of my quality of life and feeling the way I do with these emotions, that was my choice to make. And it was try and find a baseline on my own, or do you know what? I'll take the slight increased risk of the cancer. If I can normalize, I just needed to normalize something. So I did go, and I am still on HRT. And for me, that has helped me balance and normalize. But some people haven't got that choice.
But studies are being changed, sort of research is being done. There's a lot of work being done on this. So it's a question of letting all those people know that, that there will be a silver lining. We just need time.
It is. It's time, and it's trial and error, because it's hormones. The first lot of HRT I was on, it didn't make any difference. We had to try a different dosage. We had to try a different way of applying it. We had to then, every time you have it, you've got to have quite a long period of time for your hormones to adjust, and you have to track the symptoms and work them through. And so it's not like it was like, here's your HRT, next day, here I am. I'm saying like a year later, I'm in menopause in April 21. By maybe summer the next year, I'm like, okay, I think I've got this. I think we've figured out what hormones I'm needing to maybe vaguely function. That's a long time of trial and error, and a long time of trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. And then we move on to you figured that out. You've done all the chemo, you've done the operations. Life is starting to calm down, I'm assuming. And then you get, what did you call it as?
Well, my second diagnosis.
Strike one, strike two.
Strike two appeared in my life. And again, I suppose what we didn't touch on was, before I went, just to step back a little bit, just before I went to my GP with the lump in my breast, I have to say that I was uneasy about myself for maybe 9 to 12 months beforehand. And it's really hard, again, to quantify and put into words. Something just didn't feel right. I was feeling quite lethargic, feeling quite tired. They checked all my hormones and checked all my bloods, said I had low iron, I had fatigue, but that was quite normal. And I kept going back to something's not right. So before I got my breast cancer diagnosis, something was off in my body, but I didn't know what. So again, I think when I got that breast cancer diagnosis, it wasn't a complete shock because I had been saying something isn't right. It's almost like the symptom of the lump coming out, kind of.
Or whatever was happening to the cell,
something changed. And in that sense, for me to then not justify, but understand what was going on. So then if you jump forward to everything that we've just talked through and everything that's happened over 2020 to 2022, by sort of, we were coming into the end of 22, early 23. Yes, I'm trying to get my life back on track. I'm trying to figure out my new normal. What's my energy like? Can I work again? Because I gave up work. All of these sort of good problems to have in my life rather than some of the ones I had. And something didn't feel right. And it's again really hard to explain. I just kept trying to get back to feeling some sort of normal level of energy. And I was going back for checks and tests. I was kind of thinking, I've been here before. Something wasn't right before. And I got told I had cancer. Something's not right again. I don't think it's cancer. You know, I genuinely was like, I don't think it's cancer, but something's not right. And they were brilliant in terms of the medical staff were like doing all of the checks, doing all the scans, but there's nothing sinister. There's nothing of concern. We need to have a look at other options. And I just kept getting ill. I was constantly getting tonsillitis and having antibiotics that actually didn't really do much. Very, very long periods of illness and whatever the latest sort of virus was, which is obviously lots still floating around. If it hit me, my husband, my kids, my friends, they might have, I don't know, a few days of feeling rubbish, a week, months. It could be months for me. If I got anything, it didn't just knock me out at a time. And very much the responses and the answers and the kind of, when I asked the questions, was very much like, look, you've been through a lot. You've been through a lot. Let's look at what you've been through. You've been through cancer. You've been through lockdown. You've been through your genetics side of it. You've been through further surgeries. You've been through menopause. Have you dealt with it? You know, all of these things. You've had a lot, Charly. So not surprised you're ill. And so I kind of was like, okay, I better deal with some of this. You know, I better work it through. Started looking at various different therapies, various different things. But still, something wasn't right. And I just kept going back to the doctor and said, look, what else could it be? What else could it be? What else could it be? And eventually it almost was a process of elimination. You know, we've gone through all of these checks. We've gone through all of these tests. You know, what's left sort of thing. And they said, it sounds like it could be the way you're never recovering, the way your body is reacting every time you're ill. Maybe there's something around the chronic fatigue, autoimmune. And so we started exploring and tracking what I was feeling, how my body was reacting. And they were kind of like, yeah, it's either long COVID, because I had chest issues, or it's, you know, chronic fatigue syndrome, which they're very much the same thing, really. They are chronic fatigue, autoimmune based syndromes. It's just long COVID is more of a hang on, obviously, from the COVID virus and has more an impact on the chest. So he said, you know, considering everything, the likelihood is you've probably had COVID through all of this. You've probably had it as you've had a weakened immune system. So if you're going to go down one of the pathways, let's send you down long COVID. And to be honest, at that point, I was a bit like, oh, okay, either choice isn't great, let's be honest, but okay, you're offering me an understanding of what I might be experiencing. So that's what started. Okay, well, let's look at now that we'll put you not in the box, but let's say you've got long COVID. How would we deal with that? And that only happened in February of this year. So that was a good sort of, I would say, 12 to 18 months again, sort of down, confusion. What is this? This isn't normal. I was going from, I did a lot of cycling and running post-chemotherapy, post-cancer, post-surgery, to if I went for a 20-minute walk, I would need a 3-hour nap afterwards. So something wasn't right. And I just kept saying, It's not post-cancer, post-surgery hang up. There is something else. I personally refuse to believe it was post-chemotherapy weakened immune system, because by this point we had had nearly 3.5, 4 years since chemotherapy. You know, that's
Active, you were running. It's kind of there was a distance between the two, so you can't look at it as that.
There was I would say a distinct change, definitely a distinct change. So the kids are growing up, we're trying to buy a house, and I get a long COVID diagnosis. And it's funny, when you're looking for answers, you get one and actually you're like, no, I don't want that one. Thank you very much. You know, actually I'll keep looking, because the thing I found and the thing I'm still finding, what are we in now? August. So I've kind of tried to get my head around long COVID between about February and August this year. There's no answer. There's no cure. There's no fix. And I think that is, I'm not saying cancer is fixable, but there is a clear pathway. There is a clear treatment plan. There's not a clear end point, because you don't have an end point, but there is a clearer understanding of what is required to get you through cancer. Anything to do with chronic fatigue, autoimmune, not that you're on your own, but you've got to figure it out. And that's a very different mindset, because we just want to fix. We just want to fix. We don't want to feel this way anymore. You know, you don't want to feel this anyway. So what do I do to make it better? And it's like, well, you've got to learn how to manage it. I'm sorry, I've got to manage this. It's not going to go away. And they're like, no. Yeah, and that's a real shift. It's a real shift.
And what were your symptoms with the long COVID, or let's name it long COVID to give it a name, but we don't know what it is truly.
No, I'm trying to remember. I think the main things were I'd say the change in my ability to exercise. So the way the fatigue would hit me. Again, like I say, it was before cancer, even after cancer, I was running, I was exercising regularly. And I just found every time, sort of into late 22, early 23 and through 23, every time I tried to do exercise, it was like I just hit a brick wall. I'd be fine doing it. The next day, just hit a brick wall. And I would be just really tired, really struggling to think, really struggling to have, my body was just so heavy to get it to do anything. And I'd have that for like a week or so, and I'd feel a bit better. And then I'd kind of go, okay, I don't know what that was. Let's try and have another run. Let's try and get back to where I was. And then down I would go again. And it's only when I started tracking that and sort of looking at, oh, I'd have exercise and then I'd be unwell. Then I'd try and exercise again and I'd be unwell. And when you're going through it again, you don't see the pattern. And when you stop and sort of write it down, you see very clearly what I now understand is called a boom bust. But I didn't know I was experiencing it. I felt okay. I would go out and do what I thought I could do, and then I would go into a bust because it was too much for my body. I didn't understand that cycle, but it was what I would call a symptom that I then presented to the medical team, to the doctor, to say, I don't know what this is. I don't know what this is. So that was that. What I now understand is the boom bust and post-exertion malaise is my understanding of what the official term is. It's just your body gets to a certain point and it can't cope with it anymore. So it needs a long recovery time. So that was a big key thing. And then it was just the inability to recover from illness, not helped obviously having young daughters at school. They bring home lots of germs, bless them. That's the way it is. It just seemed to be whatever germs they brought back, I just couldn't fight in any sort of way. So again, it was only when I started logging it and going, well, hang on a minute, I was ill at this point in March, turned into tonsillitis. I was ill for this long. This happened again, hang on a minute, 8 weeks later. Oh, then it happened again 4 weeks later. And again, you put it all together and look at it over a long period of time. You're like, is this normal? don't know what a normal kind of recovery from virus and antibiotics and infections is, but certainly when you piece it all together, it wasn't quite right.
Looks like it was a lot, that it was one thing after the other, really.
Yeah, and that was the other thing that I would say, think I've started to experience again with long COVID, that I thought I was not over, but more on top of, was that anxiety and feeling of brain confusion and feeling overwhelmed. With HRT and lifestyle and understanding, my post-menopause situation, I was at a bit more of a baseline. And then as I was going through all of this and getting really ill with tonsillitis and everything that was going on, it was like, again, I just couldn't think. It was like my brain would get really overstimulated really quickly. So different examples would be things like I'd be making dinner, the radio might be on, the dog would bark, the children would ask me a question, and then my husband walks in and starts talking to me. And it's just like, I can't cope with this. And whereas once upon a time I could kind of switch off from different things and focus in, it's just all too much. And it's like my body just went into shutdown again. And I was like, oh, hang on a minute. I thought, not I was over this. I thought I was in control of this, but it was more extreme. And it was happening more regularly, that I was just overstimulated. That's how my perception was. And it was like not just my body that felt fatigued, but my brain as well. And so that was something else that I would say to the doctors. I was like, I just can't think, I can't process, I can't focus on more than one thing. And that was all quite new.
It's very interesting, the symptoms and what you're describing, because the menopause brings that, a nervous breakdown brings that, long COVID brings that, fibromyalgia can bring that. Obviously with fibro, there's other elements to it. So have the chronic fatigue, and with the chronic fatigue you also have the likelihood is that you're going to be sick very often. It's a myriad of symptoms. From my point of view as a therapist, what I have noticed in my clinic dealing with long COVID patients is it feels to me that it's actually a central nervous system malfunction, for a better word, where the system is literally looping in the wrong way. And I've noticed that with craniosacral therapy, with cold water therapy, for example, having cold showers and things like that can help. It doesn't take it away. It can help sort of tap into the central nervous system and slightly calm it down, because when you're talking about that overloading sensation, that's your senses. And what is your senses? Your senses is your central nervous system that you're responding to. So your heightened hearing, your heightened vision, your heightened sense of felt touch, all of that is managed and controlled by the central nervous system. Therefore, long explanation, did the Western medical industry discuss or look or assess or suggest anything to address the central nervous system in any way?
Yes, what I found was the most valuable, I would say, from that kind of pathway that I was put on with long COVID was something, I don't know if it's everywhere. I understand it's here within where I'm based in Wiltshire, was called the HOPE program. And it was an online course of a number of modules over a number of weeks, where they broke down and looked at various aspects of long COVID. And they did it in such a way that it's nice, easy, bite-sized pieces over a period of time, where you would go through various different things. So touching on the boom bust, touching on fatigue diaries, touching on how could you reduce your stress levels, such things as that you've mentioned, some of the medical kind of background behind it, other people's experiences. There was quite a lot that was covered over a nice kind of long period of time where you didn't feel overwhelmed. And so I wouldn't say I went and sat with a doctor who explains that. They kind of put me on this pathway. I spoke to, I think, one of the people obviously within that central pathway, and then was given options, and the HOPE program was one of them. And through that program for me was where I then gained lots of understanding about exactly what was going on with my body. Because there's, like you say, that aspect around the central nervous system. When it first kind of came into my mind of what it was, I didn't fully understand or what it meant or how to manage it. So for me, that program is what really kind of, maybe made the penny drop, if that makes sense. And I was like, right, okay, I get it. I understand what's going on. I understand now what options there are to support myself. And I think that being over a period of time made it much easier for me to digest and understand. And I'd seen some other ones where they were like, here's a video of fatigue, it's an hour and a half long. And I was just, I can't stay awake that long. And I just found with the Hope program, it was manageable for me and it explained it. I want to say simplistic terms, and it's not because I was stupid or didn't know it, is because of the way my brain was. I needed that methodical, simple explanation for me to be able to process it. And that's, even acceptance of that is a really, really hard aspect. And for me, that just gave me that opportunity. It gives you tasks to reflect, really important stuff that you're kind of forced to do to actually face what you're dealing with, but in a way that doesn't feel intimidating, belittling, or anything like that.
Is the program still online? Do you know? Can people access it?
Yes. So I certainly know it's within Wiltshire. Whether it's wider, I honestly don't know. I know I have access to it and all of the lessons and the recordings. And they sent me all the downloads of everything, and even all of the really useful little YouTube bite-sized videos that are a really lovely 3 minutes long. I can just clip in and out and pop in and look at them, and I can get to the fatigue diary and all of those aspects as well. So it's not like you just do it and then you can't ever access any of the resources or material again. Not.
Okay. We'll put a link again on the...
Yeah, no, I can send you some details. Like I say, whether it's further around, it was just the option that I was giving, and it worked really well for me.
Brilliant. And to be honest, those bite-sized bits of information is part of the reason why this podcast exists, because it's not just about explaining to people people's journey and what they've gone through and how it may or may not relate to them, but it is also about teaching you about the central nervous system, about the human body. Within the podcast, there are lots and lots of interviews with researchers, doctors, individuals that know about the human body, and try and explain it in a very simplistic way so that we can be empowered and be more in control of our knowledge, because I truly believe that knowledge is power.
Yeah, I completely agree.
If we can understand it, I might not fully understand how the vagus nerve works and, why my central nervous system is on fire. But if I can comprehend, okay, well, if my neck feels really, really tight, that might be impacting my central nervous system in a negative way. So I can go and get a massage, or I can ask my partner to massage my shoulders and my neck, and that can release and make me feel a little bit better. So that goes on to the next question for me, which is, what type of things, apart from the Hope program, what other things, or did you do other things to support yourself during this very long process of healing that you've gone through?
So I've mentioned, yes, the Hope program. The other aspect for myself was solution-based hypnotherapy. And it's not something I'd ever, I suppose, been aware of, tried anything like that. I found through the Hope program was one of my big issues was slowing down, relaxing, stopping, resting. Lots of different aspects within my life that my body was clearly saying, you need to stop, you need to stop. And I genuinely didn't know how, for various reasons, but also because I felt so out of control, like you say, with the central nervous system being overstimulated, you're tired. It's almost like I couldn't think how to switch off and relax. I approached a local therapist who did solution-based hypnotherapy, and I found that, really useful tool. I was quite literally forced to stop and to reflect and to focus on what my body was doing, what my breathing was doing, and to prioritize time in my life to learn how to switch off. And I still struggle with it. It's not like it happens overnight, but I have a track that I listen to for sleeping. I now actually can't go to bed without it. It's kind of almost like my sleep routine. And it's like my body knows that, and my brain knows that this process is happening. If I need to rest at all in the day, which I frequently do, I will put on the track. And it's kind of allowing myself that time, but also track talks through, starting at the top of your head and working your way down. And I'm lying there and I think, yeah, I'm relaxed. It's okay, I'm relaxed. And then the track says, now focus on your shoulders. And I'm like, oh, actually, no, my shoulders are quite tense. And I'm not actually switched off. And it's like I have to go through that process. And for me, having someone to talk it through with me, to support it, who I had to go to weekly and talk about what's worked, what didn't, for her to say, your brain initially is going to fight doing this track because you're not used to it. Your body's going to fight it, and that's okay. And it was really, I suppose, life-changing for me in many ways, that it was almost someone was explaining to me that process that my body and my brain needed. So for me, that was a really useful solution and a really useful way of understanding how I could help myself and my body. The understanding of holding where the stress and the tension is. So bringing aspects into my life every day where I quite literally rolling my shoulders more regularly. And when I can feel it's getting tighter and tighter or it's getting too much, okay, when was the last time you had a massage? When was the last time you actually took that time for you? Being okay with taking that time and saying, actually, going and spending 2 hours or however long it is to have that massage to reduce some of the tension and relieve that aspect of your body and your brain is okay. And I think that was one of the hardest things for me to understand. And that's what the HOPE program and the hypnotherapy kind of helped with. And I think they're some of the main sort of ones. But again, I tried different things. And one of the other ones I tried was integral eye movement therapy. I don't know if it's anything you've ever heard of. Fascinating to learn about my, I suppose, entrenched behavior patterns, my way of thinking, my way of processing, and understanding more about myself over the last 40 years as to why I am where I am. And that's all connected to understanding how to rest, how to stop, how to relax. Really challenging. All of these therapies I found really challenging because you've got to make changes about yourself, and it's challenging everything you believe is okay with you and right with the way you behave. And it challenges all of that. It was really tough doing all of that hypnotherapy and the integral eye movement. But I found it really useful.
I think what's very interesting is that it's very useful, but it's also, as you say, you have to make the changes. And I think this is where a lot of people don't understand that to heal, sometimes it needs to come from within. That we go to the doctor gives us the medicine, we get operated, we do this, we do that. But with certain conditions, especially autoimmune conditions, the healing comes from within, because there is no magic tablet, there is no magic patch or no magic thing that you can take that will makes it, fixable and done super quickly.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I remember vividly in the integral eye movement therapy, one of the sessions, I was really angry with my therapist because I was basically felt she was implying that I wasn't willing to make change, and it kind of can be perceived by myself that everything else was, happening around me. And I was doing everything I can to fix me. I was doing everything I could to change. And my therapist was pointing it out that I was all talk. And actually, I wanted someone to come along and fix me, and I was fighting it and fighting it and fighting it. And yes, that understanding that it comes from me is not a lesson I expected at age 41. I thought I had it. I genuinely thought, I don't think I had the answers, but I genuinely thought I was doing okay. And it's like, actually, no, Charlie, you're not really sure, are you, how to switch off, how to properly look after your body. I think you've just been a little bit in survival mode for quite a long time. And it's really, really challenging to kind of accept it's on you. It's all on you. And those therapies have helped me. Nature has helped me. I've always been an outside girl, but going for walks, taking the dogs out, being around horses, just being, that helps me. And I think that has a lot to do with as well that feeling of overstimulation within your body and your brain. Going for a walk in nature asks so little of you that you can actually enjoy it and you can just focus on that. And for me, it's where I feel the most peace because there's not too much stimulation, there's not too much responsibility. You know, home is home, but there's a lot of responsibility at home. If I go out in nature and I just go for a walk and it's just outside and you can just breathe in that fresh air and take that moment and take that breath. For me, that was a big aspect in recovery and healing. It still is. I say a big aspect. It still is. It's a part of my life that I need to feel balanced.
One of the things that you haven't said, which I think is really important to hear, is how the pressures that we have as human beings and as women, and how you worked through giving yourself the permission to be, because that's one of the things that is very challenging for all of us, is we have so much pressure. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yes, it was all about what I was kind of struggling through, wasn't it? That's right. So yeah, it's trying to understanding. Just have to give my brain a minute here.
It's okay. I think it was basically, what were the ripple effects from this?
That's right. Yeah. I think, we've kind of touched on the kind of more clinical medical aspects, the different therapies that have kind of helped me, the different support. And I think part of going through a lot of that therapy, understanding nature and sleep, valuing sleep suddenly in my life, I think a lot of it was almost like a grief process, to be honest. Almost like a grief process that I'd have to start again and really look back at where my life has been to where it is now and the reasons why. And I think I felt like I had to move through a lot of that loss of control that I've talked about with my body and mind, and how I'd lost that person I thought I was. Because for me, I was Charlie, the ex-army officer, became a personal trainer, always on the go, arguably always busy, always what I thought was living life to the full. And it took me a long time, more with COVID, the long COVID, to kind of accept a lot of where I was now. So in my head, I wanted to be a parent who had loads of fun with her children and went on adventures, and my adventure would be, right, we're going away camping for a weekend, we're going to go away and do, dog walks and this or that. And I was faced with me being a parent who would need time in the day to rest if I had the energy to cook dinner. And for me, I felt really guilty. I felt really, really guilty. And I felt like a lot of pressure, probably self-induced, to be honest, that I should be doing more. And I think as women, as a woman, I think we are particularly bad for this aspect of guilt. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to try and do everything. I do believe more females are diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome than men. I do believe that. I think it's changing a little bit with long COVID and how many people have impacted with long COVID. I think that's because as women, we feel like we've got to cope with everything. We've got to. And I think we feel this incredible guilt and selfishness if we stop and put ourselves first. And I think I can see now that I was probably always stressed. I was probably not really giving my body ever time to recover. I think I wore being busy as a badge of honor. I took on the mantra very much from the army and through a lot of my life of sleeps for the weak is a very harsh word, but it's a harsh statement, but it's what is often put across in society. It's almost seen as you're a good person doing what you should be doing if you're burning the candle at both ends, if you work hard and you play hard. And I was in that rat race. I was in that. This is how life is, isn't it? You just keep going. You just keep going. You've got to be busy.
It's the statement that you just said, let's work hard and play hard.
Yeah.
And it's a lovely idea. Our system burns. Our system is unable to continue that at high intensity.
Absolutely. And maybe, I don't know, I haven't got the answers. Maybe if I had taken on a bit more post-cancer, maybe I wouldn't have got long COVID. Maybe if I had actually taken the opportunity to rest then more rather than rushing the recovery in some ways, maybe I wouldn't be where I am today. I don't know. Can't spend too long now reflecting about what I didn't do. I am now in a situation, my new normal is not where I thought it would be. And that could be, a lot to do with my fault and my behaviors. The reality is I know now for me to continue, have some sort of enjoyment of life and not keep battling my body, I've got to change. I have got to change, and I have got to, my body is giving me signs loud and clear. And I think I would be a fool not to listen at this point. And perhaps we feel guilty for that. Perhaps we're so busy as women feeling that we've got to do it all, that there is this constant comparison and pressure to keep up, that it's really, really hard to take on board. It's really hard. I suppose, suddenly being 41 and facing this, it's really, really difficult, and it's still a challenge. And I just have to try and be grateful that I've still got an opportunity to try.
I interviewed a doctor who's 103 called Dr. Gladys.
Wow.
She, one of the gems that she said, doing nothing is doing.
Yes.
I was like, wow, that is so beautiful and so simple, but so true.
Yep.
Nothing is doing.
Doing nothing is sometimes exactly what you need to do.
Yeah.
But we see it as a waste of our time. And I don't know why. But I think it's really hard just to sit and be. You feel like you should be doing something. And
well, you mentioned in your information or the questionnaire that one of the things that you've enjoyed tremendously is actually you've learned to value what it is to do puzzles and reading, which you never used to do before. So the slowing down has opened up a different avenue and a different pathway for you.
I would say I did it when I was a lot younger, probably when I was a child. And then I think you get older and you almost don't see the point. You're too busy. I don't know. I was too busy, in inverted commas, enjoying life to see the value of sitting and reading and being. And I'm now very grateful for that time and opportunity. Like I say, I might not be the parent I thought I would be, going out and doing lots, but I can sit with my daughters and do a puzzle, and finding the joy in that is really special. And I don't think if you had said to early 20-year-old me that I'd be enjoying sitting and doing puzzles, I probably would have, scoffed at it. And that's a real shame, because there's so much value and joy from it. I just didn't see it. But it's a shame I had to have a chronic illness to point it out.
but look at the positive that you're teaching your daughters how to be.
I hope so. I think that's one of the real aspects I have tried to take away from a lot of this. There's always a flip side, isn't there? For everything, there is a flip side. And I think, like you say, the value of time and being is one of them. But if I can teach my daughters to take the pressure off themselves and just be, then yeah, I'll be quite happy with, my role as a parent.
Now, I know that we've gone way over time, so I apologize for taking your time, but it's
That's all right.
really interesting and just such an amazing conversation, and I'm very, very grateful for it. I just have one more, if it's okay with you, just one question, which is, if there are listeners in the same situation or that have been thrown into the menopause, so if we cover all the ranges of things that you've had to go through, what's your snippet that you would give them? What is that nugget? And you might not have a specific nugget, but you've given enough by saying learning to be.
Yes, I would say it's hard, isn't it? Because it's such a personal question, and everyone's experience diagnosis is so difficult and so different. I would agree, like you said earlier, knowledge is power, and I would say the more you can understand about symptoms and potential illnesses, the better. I think just use the knowledge out there. If you're worried about anything, get it checked. Get it checked. I would urge anybody to go medical team, whatever it is, and be told everything's okay, then worry and leave it longer. And I think that's something I always try to reiterate to anyone who kind of asks for any advice. I think we touched on it as well. Take ownership of your body and your health. Don't wait for that chronic illness to force you to. I would say no one is responsible for fixing it or looking after it other than you. And I can see that definitely between, my cancer and autoimmune kind of chronic fatigue approach, and how that ownership is really, really key, that lack of magic kind of pill. But I think what I always come back to if I had to do one nugget, because obviously that was a few, I would say it still comes down to take a breath. Take a breath. Take things one day, one hospital appointment, or even 1 hour at a time. I think there's so much going on, so much out of your control. You've got to try and find a way to focus on what you can control. And that most of the time is your reaction to the situation you're in. And I think you've got to remain flexible. There is no clear path. There is no answers. There's no, I suppose, grand one-liners, but I think it always comes back to one day, 1 hour at a time. Take a breath. Get that inner healing. Always remember to take a breath, and do not feel guilty for doing so. I think that's the main thing. That may not have been one nugget. I think that was quite a few.
Fantastic. Charly, I don't want to take any more of your time. So thank you so much for
It's my pleasure.
And for being so honest.
No, I hope it can help. I genuinely hope it can help. And thank you for all the work you're doing and the time you're putting in to help everyone that you can.
Thank you.